Good evening.
Good evening. Rabih always had planned to give me a lap dance, but I never thought it would be in Sarajevo. Well, the night is young. Well,
We just started.
it is going to get fun. Welcome to tonight's event. I'm afraid our generous host is probably caught somewhere in the rain, so I will be your host tonight. My name is John Freeman. It gives me an immense amount of joy to present to you Rabih Alameddine tonight. In the Bible, after God says to Noah, after the flood, the fire next time, and this is the fire. And you're going to see why. Rabih was born in 1959 in Amman, Jordan, and grew up in Lebanon and Kuwait, and left and lived in England and was educated in California, like myself. We have only that to complain about. He moved to San Francisco after studying engineering and got a master's degree in business and became a painter because that is where the action was at. And for a number of years produced some beautiful paintings which are on the cover of several of his books, including the one of the two we are launching here tonight. His first book, Kool-Aids, which I have to say is one of the most radical and beautiful and disturbing and brilliant and arresting texts I have ever read in my life. It features a gay HIV positive narrator named Mohammed. It is, we're only starting. Leave some for the rest of the night. It's the Dance of the Seven Veils. It takes place during the Lebanese Civil War and the rise of the AIDS epidemic in San Francisco. It features 4 cycling narrators and characters. It has dialogues between various gods and Tom Cruise, who is complaining, no, he is not homosexual, continuously. It has news reports. It is an immense and beautiful text, and it is extraordinary that it's a first book. And I want to thank whoever set up, probably Sasha or Amira or someone from Bookstan, this event at this point in the festival, because there is a logical progression, beginning with the Making of Zombie Wars, which is a book in some ways about fear and about nationality, and a book about the degradation of language and the necessity to tell stories within the degraded language. And we moved on to Rabi Hajj's beautiful novel about the Lebanese Civil War, and the need to not just chronicle things, but to describe the machinations of power within those conflicts. Within the larger context of a festival about East-West, we talked about notions of arrival and how important that is, and all of these things come together in Kool-Aids, which is just the beginning of Rabih Alameddine's literary career. It was published in 1998. He published a story collection 1 year later called Perv. You can see that as an autobiographical text. It was followed up in 2001. Consider this as just a 3-year period by an extraordinary novel called I the Divine, which is a woman trying to tell her life story and rewriting her first chapter over and over. And as the novel progresses, it develops more layers and tells more about her life and her family's life. He took a 7-year break, and that was not a break. It was working on ecstatic and big novel wrapped around 1001 Nights, a man going home as his father is dying, telling stories to keep him alive. Meanwhile, a sort of magical, realistic text progresses parallel to that, the Hakawati, which in Arabic means storyteller. That was published in 2008, and in 2014, the other book that Rabih is producing tonight in Bosnian, The Unnecessary Woman, which is, in some ways, he has another novel coming out this year, but these are interesting bookends. On one end you have Kool-Aids, which is a montage text. It is an unstable text. It is a text which invites you into it. It is a text made up of other texts. It is a text set very much during the Lebanese Civil War. And on the other end you have The Unnecessary Woman, which is set during the winter of the life of a 72-year-old woman living in Beirut who's been translating texts from French and English into Arabic, not publishing them. Her hair dye has gone wrong, and so her hair is blue. And she's describing her life almost chronologically, basically, through the life of these texts. And in between these two books, you see the arc of an immense and restless and provocative mind. And I just want to read to you one tiny section, which will bring us back to Mona El-Tahlawi's presentation. It is from Kool-Aid's, his first book. Perhaps the whole root of our trouble, the human trouble, is that we will sacrifice all the beauty of our lives. We'll imprison ourselves in totems, taboos, crosses, blood sacrifices, steeples, mosques, races, armies, flags, nations, in order to deny the fact of death, which is the only fact we have. Rabih Alameddine. So I'm going to start with a softball. You have a gay character, narrator in Kool-Aid's named Muhammad. You have a grieving son in the Hakwari named Osama. When did you become such a bad boy?
I was born that way. Long before Lady Gaga. I actually don't think, I mean, I was born bad, but I don't think that actually first thank you for being here in this weather. I really appreciate it. And yeah, so I don't think I don't consider myself when I sit down to write, I don't try to be a bad boy. I sit down to write. And usually what I write about are things that I'm obsessed with. And usually things that I'm obsessed with are things that I'm angry at. So what usually comes out is uncomfortable for people. But my existence is uncomfortable for people.
I'm quite happy.
Again, it's really important for me to actually have said that now. That my existence, the mere fact that I exist, is uncomfortable for people. So I write about the things that interest me, and that is a little bit uncomfortable. But why did I write about Muhammad as a gay man? Because there's so many Muhammads out there. That's what it turned out to be.
I'm very interested, I'm so glad to be talking to you about Kool-Aid's, because there's one book of yours that I admire the most, but yet I struggle to understand how it was made. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, when I was talking to Rabih, he described coming to the United States, learning English, studying with Russians, working as a laborer, taking pictures during the Civil War. When did your instinct to make visual art shade over into narrative? Were you always a reader?
I was always a reader. I've always wanted to be a writer. Before he died, my father asked me, he reminded me before he died that when I was 4, he asked me what did I want to be when I grew up, and I said I wanted to be a writer. But I wanted to write Superman comics. But the idea of storytelling has always been there, and I've been a reader for a long, long time. I never wrote anything because I didn't feel courageous enough, or I didn't think that I had anything to say. When I sat down to write Kool-Aid's, it was a specific thing that happened. When I was really upset with a lot of the books that I was reading, I was just not interested. I was upset at what was being presented as literature. It was not my thing. And primarily I was upset at how writers were writing about AIDS. And I felt that at the time, people were dying, and everybody felt sorry. Like, most of the AIDS books at the time were about going with your last trip to Paris and buying a sweater and eating cheese for the last time. And I wanted to fuck something.
Well, I want to talk about that because it is a violent book. It's violently disarranged in I can tell a careful way. And rereading it today, I was thinking about what Sasha Hemman was saying when he was describing today on the panel about the issue of Freeman's on arrival, was that he, when he was relearning English, it was a way for him to control the disarrangement of his mind. And you know, I feel in this book a rage to disarrange.
This is actually, for me, it was never to arrange what was in my mind. I wanted to write about the chaos that was in my mind. My friends were dying. There was a war back home. My relatives were being killed. And Reagan was forgetting everything. It was a big deal for me. So there was a lot of rage. And actually, it's funny because the book that's coming out now is a revisit to those years. And it's as if then once I wrote that book, I almost went into a corner of forgetting how angry I was. And then all of a sudden it came back 20 years later. But the other thing that happened then when I sat down to write the book is that I got dumped by an asshole. Before he dumped me, I was dating this guy for about 4 years, and it was a mistake from the beginning, but I didn't know that. I started painting, and I got successful really quickly, and he was a computer executive, and he decided that he's going to do something creative. And what he wanted to do was write a book. So he had met this guy, and those two decided that they're going to write a book, and Mona would love this, about this man who's an executive, and he gets a young boy who's an Egyptian young boy to become his slave. And my first reaction when I heard that was, couldn't you have made him Lebanese? I mean, why pretend? But what was really lovely was they did this research, both of them together, and they came out and I said, you don't know anything about Egypt. You don't know anything about Egypt. And he goes, well, we've got research. They researched, and they made him from this little town. And he said, we looked all over. That little town, and I said, what's the little town name? And he says, Le Caire. Le Caire is Cairo in French. So this little fucking town of 20 million people is what they thought this little boy was coming to. And that's when I realized that this was American literature. That these two white boys were going to sit down and write about Le Caire. And I decided, fuck them. I'm going to sit down and tell them what it's like. Oh, and the best thing is, the best revenge ever. After a 4-year relationship, you write a book and he's not in it.
I wanted to
I leave men speechless.
This is why I haven't shaved in 5 days. I'm trying to cover my skin. It's not working.
Turn red in a minute.
Just wait for the lights. I want to talk to you a bit about what you were describing about the Reagan years. Because we had this appalling Hillary Clinton gaffe recently, where she was describing how instrumental Nancy Reagan was to recognizing the AIDS crisis as it was beginning, and which was categorically, fabulously untrue. That under the Reagan years, it went from a controllable situation to something vastly almost out of control. Simultaneously, under Reagan, there was not just a misreporting of what was happening in Lebanon, but an inclusion. And I wonder when you're writing from into spaces which have been ignored, what, if any, your responsibilities are? Because throughout this text, as in Rabih Haj's novel, there are actual massacres described, there are actual benchmark events throughout the Lebanese Civil War, there are explanations about the division between East and West Beirut, some of them factual, some of them told in letters to the main characters, some of them just diary entries. So are you trying to make the reader figure out what is true and what is not true, or are you just trying to mess with their minds?
That's actually a really difficult question, because my first response, and forgive me, is fuck the reader. It's not about, I mean, for a lot of writers, they say it's a communication. It isn't. It isn't. I write for me. I write because I have something to say to me. Sometimes I think that, when people ask me what's your writer, I always say, it's a younger version of me, probably taller and more handsome, larger penis. But it's the idea that it's not an attempt to communicate. It's an attempt to, it is in some ways, it's both, but it's an attempt to record something that is important for me and how I would like to see it. What happens then is the reader has to, luckily also there's editors in between who tell you nobody will understand that. But the thing that happens is a book for me then becomes something separate where a reader reads it, and it's an interaction between the reader and the book. That's not necessarily a communication from me because it becomes separate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I want to ask you a follow-up then, because throughout this text, in various points, different narrators address the reader directly. One of them, while listing various symptoms of AIDS or drugs, says, "But this won't happen to you, will it?" In another situation, the reader it lists a number of things that have happened and says, and one of the narrators it says, "Is this enough for you to care?" Throughout, 2/3 of the way through the book, one of the narrators describes various things which have happened in Beirut, and it says, "Is this enough? Can we stop now?" Various characters are in all, four of the four horsemen of the apocalypse, if you will, in the book, are speaking. At this point they may or may not be ghosts, and they say, "Can we leave now?" And I find this interesting because as a writer, as a creator of the text, you're saying, I'm not speaking to the reader, but the text
Does speak to the reader.
Needs to address the reader, and those are two separate things, aren't they?
Well, again, I wrote this book and never knowing whether anybody will read it or not. So it wasn't exactly talking to a reader, it was talking to, in many ways, me or someone like me. The reason, there are many things that I did in that book, some were unconscious and some were conscious. But the reason that I speak to the reader is because in my experience, at that time, and it is still here now, a lot of literature is not about the readers per se. It's an escape. It's Sasha talks about it's about empathy, to empathize with the. I couldn't care less if you empathize with my characters. I don't want people to read about AIDS and go, "Oh, that's nice, pass the beer." It's like you guys, when we talk about the war, lots of people know about the war in the siege of Sarajevo, but for a lot of people, it's something that happens elsewhere. And for a lot of the books that are read about it, it's something that happens elsewhere. So how can we, as writers, break that? How can I get a reader involved in, not necessarily the experience, but not in an escape from it? Not to feel false empathy, not to feel what I would call pre-existing emotions. Like all I have to do is, go, "Oh, the Holocaust," and all of you have feelings about that are pre-existing. Well, how do we present it in such a way that we transcend that, we break that wall? I thought it was stupid in Kool-Aid, but it did work in some ways that I just tell people, I'm breaking the wall.
And also the book is filled with a kind of pastiche of other texts that are news reports, quotes from other books. And in some ways I see the beginning of every single one of your books in this book. The diaries, which are from the perspective of Samir's mother, who ends up having a deeply, I feel so wrong, but finding an incredibly sexy relationship with a man on the other side of Beirut, who's a bit of an extremely brutal man. But your book is constantly smashing together sex and death in ways that never allows the reader escaping. I know, we all, in French, to have an orgasm is a little death, and that, we all know that the collision between mortality and immortality happens in the sheets. And yet, every time...
Let's talk about sex.
Let's do it, okay.
I'm joking,
But, it feels like one of the ways that you're constantly not allowing the reader to escape is that you're putting something deeply horrific next to something ecstatic.
Well, that's one technique, and different writers do different things. But for me, again, it is the avoidance of pre-existing emotions. So how do I get somebody to be surprised, as opposed to, like, you read about AIDS and you go, oh, this is sad, and then you put the book away and you have a beer or whatever. So how do you break that? Well, one of the ways you break that is by making it funny, by changing the paradigm, anything that would break the monotony of reading a book as an escape. Because there's nothing worse. It becomes really sentimental when you're reading a sad book and it's like, that's really sad,
One of the passages that does this in Kool-Aid is there's a list that starts of people who have died, and it says, I love you, Scott, I love you, and it starts listing them, and then they start responding, and then one says, good night, John Boy, and which is a quote from the Waltons. And they said, is this the Waltons of AIDS? And then they start critiquing, and just at the moment where it's about to turn into kind of, and it's not, but it's playing with the edge of sentimentality that one feels in movies like Philadelphia. You pull the rug out from beneath the reader and say, but this is absurd. And you have this instinct of what's, I think, quite amazing across your books is, so here's this book, which is postmodern, you can call it whatever. It is a book that needs assembly. It's almost like a B.S. Johnson novel. I don't know if anyone knows this British author who at one point just stuffed a bunch of various texts in a box and gave it to the reader and said, here, you make it.
Pessoa did the same thing.
Yeah, and let's talk about Pessoa, because Pessoa had how many? 107 different personas?
No, actually 72. He had Pessoa is a Portuguese writer, and he had 72 personas. He wrote as 72 different people, and I'm fascinated by him. For me, the amazing thing is that it is arguable, but that the four greatest Portuguese poets were all Fernando Pessoa. But what he did, which was amazing to me, is that he would, write a poem as one character and have another character as a critic criticize that poem, and then criticize all of it. Just became so confusing and so lovely that he's sort of my idol, because he doesn't need an outside world. He has all this inside of him, and that's how I feel as a human being, that I lived by myself, so I became sort of an idol.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit, let's go back in time, and forgive me for doing this, but I'm curious because as you can tell on stage, you will definitely feel it in his books, and I hope you read them, but you're one of the funniest purveyors of what Susan Sontag called camp. Camp as an aesthetic, and camp as a form of rupture within a text, camp as a social form of rupture, as in you presenting one thing and saying the other. And I wonder if you have any thoughts about her idea of what camp was as a artistic and literary aesthetic, and B, as you develop as a person, how you feel about that kind of text as an individual, as you perform your identity in the world as a sort of notional self.
Well, It's difficult because one, Susan Sontag is difficult. So explaining what she meant by camp is really difficult for me. Camp is a difficult concept. Do you guys know what camp is? The most important thing I think you could tell is that camp is it's difficult to explain. It's primarily gay, drag queen. It turns something that's supposed to be silly into art.
And it turns the serious into silly.
Into silly. A lot of gay men have that naturally. Because the way that we look at the world and the way that the world looks at us makes us treat everything as camp. But I don't see camp as different than, I can't tell you the difference between camp and irony or camp and sarcasm and cynicism. All I can tell you is this is how I see the world. I find everything either, I could get really upset, which happens, but then at some point it breaks into, I can make fun of it. Because if I can't make fun of something, it has power over me. So that is something that I figured out a while ago. So I tend to, without noticing, start making fun of things. So, I make fun of religion all the time because it is funny. It's really funny. But it's more than that. If we can't make fun of religion, if we can't make fun of politics, they control us. So camp in many ways is a way of putting something down, but at the same time lifting it up. It's a way of telling a very serious subject and penetrating through what I was saying, pre-existing emotions. So it's one way of telling something that is really, really serious, and we make fun of it.
I think one of the things that camp is most effective at doing is sort of disrupting the performances of gender. I've never felt more moved to chivalry than lighting the cigarette of a drag queen. Here, darling. And similarly, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, you were born in Beirut you were born in Amman in 1959, grew up in Beirut, in a certain time and place, and I wonder at what point did you realize that gender is A, a performance, and B, something that you can play with, and as you learn to play with gender as an individual and then as an artist, how long did it take you to still not have the notions of what it meant to be masculine hanging over you? Because those things are long-lasting.
Actually, they're forever. We're stuck because whether it's the system that we live under or what the constant feedback of being what is masculine and what is feminine. I think for me it was in many ways easier because I can make fun of it. There are pictures of me as 9 wearing I look like a little girl, and it was a joke that we did. And so that's how it can be done. It's just to penetrate in terms of humor or camp. But I never had, for me, gender was always fluid. I'm not, and I've never thought of being trans, even though I have lots of trans friends, because I am male in some ways, but internally I could move from male to female easily. I never had an issue with that. I never, I guess, in some ways, part of the package. I never liked authority. I never, even as a young, Rawi and I were talking the other day, my nickname as a little boy was Jibhat al-Rafid, which was a PLO faction in Lebanon that said no to everything. So it's like, whatever you told me, I'd say no. So that, if you're going to prescribe to me, like, it's just, that's the way that it is. I never felt that, that anybody had a say in how I was going to be. I remember when I was first moved to San Francisco and I was, a gay man, I loved soccer. That was much worse in some ways to come out as a soccer player in the gay community than it was to come out as gay in the straight community. So, I started a gay soccer team, because I wanted to. It just never occurred to me that I'm not supposed to do this. Or maybe it did occur to me when you tell me, don't do this, that's usually the first thing that I would do. I'm not sure it's about gender or it's just my nature, I don't like to be told what to do. The first book was a reaction against what I was reading. The last book was a reaction against what I got from Hakawatis, like all the acclaim. I hated them. I hated all the reviews because they were great, and I thought they didn't understand anything that I was doing. So I write a book that completely contradicts everything that came beforehand. It's just my nature.
Let's go back to your...
Sorry, because the other part is I would have gotten bored.
Yeah, no, I know. There's some interesting synchronicity here that, Alexander Heming's most acclaimed book to date was The Lazarus Project, which everyone finally kind of vaguely wrapped their head around, but began discussing in terms of a kind of trope of immigrant literature. And so what does he do for his next book? He satirizes his own book. And I feel like, similarly, each one of your books, it's like, you think I'm good at this? Well, what my next book is going to be? It's going to be a book in first chapters. Okay, you think I'm good at this? You know what my next book is going to be? It's going to be an epic, sort of, 600-page tale, like 1,001 Nights. Oh, you think that book is good? I'm going to have one character chronologically through time who's just talking about the books.
One of the big things with Hakawati that I still to this day upsets me is it was seen as an Arab book. It's like, oh, look at these little Arabs. Aren't they really nice? They tell stories to each other. They tell cute stories. People really said that. The review in the New York Times, which was a great review according to them, said, this book is a bridge to the Arab soul. It's like, what the fuck is an Arab soul? Where the fuck can you find that? And, 350 million, or I don't know how much, they have one fucking soul, and my book is that bridge to that. What the shit? And so it just was treated as this, isn't it cute? And then, my favorite. It's not about a jihadist, it's about a storyteller, aren't they nice? So, this is my mentality. At the peak of the acclaim, this was, New York Times and all that, and I was furious. So you can see, I have issues. My psychiatrist says I have issues.
I love something that Rabih said in passing. He almost said under his breath. When he talked about the success of, the Nero's Game, which, by the way, comes up in this book. I was wondering why The Deer Hunter was so popular. In this book, Rabih Alameddine explains that the gangsters and
they actually played it.
They actually played Russian roulette because they had watched The Deer Hunter. And
but the thing that was interesting is that I knew this guy who killed himself, and the thing was that they said it was Russian roulette. But I always wondered afterwards, was it true? Or did he just fucking kill himself? That guy was 2 years older than me, and we lived right next door to each other. He probably killed about 40, 50 people, okay? And he killed himself. So his mother says that he killed himself while playing Russian roulette. And I thought, why even bother? You just shoot yourself. But it was interesting because I don't know whether they played Russian roulette or not, but that was the rumor that they were playing Russian roulette. I think they just fucking killed themselves.
I want to ask you another question, because one of the great this book is bejeweled with details that you wonder if they're true or not, one of which is that one of the militias got a fashion designer to make their outfits, which are camouflage, but they have pink berets.
No, the colors were camouflage pink.
Oh, it's even better.
Seriously.
Was this true?
Yeah. It was exactly the camouflage pattern, but it was pinks. And yes, they were one of the worst militias ever, and they were wearing pink. I mentioned in the book, they wanted to be called Dairos and Cavaliers. I'm not kidding. And their nickname was the Pink Panthers. But then, they were pink for about a week before they started washing them.
And then they blurred into a kind of...
Went into face of Pepto-Bismol, kind of.
But what I was asking, Rabih said that thing, which was really it's like a knife in the heart. Is that he wasn't ungrateful for success. But he is not willing to give up his anger, because his anger is important to who he is as a person, and it keeps him safe. It also makes him it keeps him writing, and it strikes me, rereading this book, and that throughout you have never given up on that. That your anger mutates into different sources, but it's always there.
Anger is important. I do not know how anyone can live in this world without being angry. I really can't. I cannot imagine anyone listening to a politician and not getting angry. That just does not compute for me. I do not understand how, you can see how someone treats another person and not be angry. And I do not like how I get treated. And the thing that's interesting is that we have this argument with my psychiatrist. I pay him a lot of money. That he thinks that I put myself in these positions. And it's like, yes, because the world sucks. So I don't know how. Well, there are many ways of dealing with it. One of them is through humor. But there's a lot of anger. There's always been a lot of anger. I was born angry, and I was born arguing. That's what my mother says. I want to, in many ways, I want to change the world, and the other side is I don't give a fuck about the world anymore. So like these two competing things.
Kool-Aid is also full of this kind of series of philosophical arguments. Some of them tongue-in-cheek, some of them quite serious. About what is the meaning of life. And I won't retell the Mulia joke that was told last night, but these are very serious conversations, and Spinoza comes up in Alexander Heming's The Making of Zombie Wars. And I want to mention that something Sasha has said off stage frequently to those of us who listen to him, which is everybody.
I don't know.
See, authority issues. But one of the things, actually this isn't Sasha. See, he's already. This is an American poet from California, Kay Ryan, who you probably know. He's a wonderful poet who makes these little sort of bullet-shaped poems that are so rivetless you don't know how they're made, but they contain worlds. And we were talking, and she said that there's these ideas that some people see their life in narrative. It's a sequence of events that this lead to this, lead to this. And then there are people that see their lives in a pointillicist way, that there's a kind of collection of dots. We arrange them in the stories we tell ourselves. And in this book, you have this rather longish quote. I think it's either Kierkegaard or Kant, one of the case. That one of the amazing things about human life is that we create space and time with our minds. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because if there's anything that unites your various books, from Kool-Aids to the Hakawati to The Unnecessary Woman, it is the creation of narrative space and how that's made by the mind.
I had to say this. My bedtime is 9 p.m. So this is way past my bedtime. And it's difficult for me to answer a question like that because I'm not sure I understand it. Gin and tonic. Space and time.
Do you see, let's just begin at the beginning of my long-ass question. Is
I
it,
take my clothes off now.
yeah. Do you see sequence, or do you see an arrangement of space that is arranged purely by the mind?
It's for me, it's random. It's completely random. Everything is random. My mind, like everybody else's, we try to create some sort of narrative, which is why, for a lot of people, linear narrative is extremely important. It is fascinating to me that a lot of people will fight tooth and nail if you tell them a story in a different way. Because this is how we want to make sense. You know, I was born, there's a reason for it, and the truth is, there is no reason. Everything is abstract. Everything is completely arbitrary. The reason, I mean, the fact that I am here is by complete chance. And we start doing reasons after. We give life meaning after things happen, because that's how, that's how we created God. You know, we give meaning after. And it works for a lot of people. It never made sense to me, because my mind has never been able to work linearly. I can go from one subject to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, and then afterwards I get a some sort of like, oh, I understand what I'm saying, which is also why I've never been able to understand any of my books.
This book in particular is juxtaposing two things which there's been a lot of pontification about, a lot of research, which is in the sense that you can create linear narratives, which Randy Schultz did with his book about AIDS, and which many reporters and historians have done with the Lebanese Civil War. And yet what you're doing, I think, is by putting these two things together, there are two things which defy narrative.
Let's put it this way. Crisis, life does not have a narrative. The difference, what the AIDS crisis did and what a war does, it allows you to see life as it is, that it's not a linear, reasonable thing. When we are living in real life, we are sort of comatose, where we think, oh, this makes sense, this person did this. You think you understand motivation, but the truth is, there is no such thing, and there is nothing in this world that teaches us that life is completely fucked up, more than war, and civil war in particular. You begin to see the world for what it is, that nobody gives a shit about anything. You know, we think we do, and there are some of us who try, but the truth of the matter is, I mean, I've been shot at, when I'm being shot up, I don't care about feminism. I don't care about gay liberation. I don't care, this is the basic human thing, so that everything else that we put is after the fact. I can tell you many times, you get up there, somebody holds a gun, and you go, yes, I'm a fucker, yes, whatever you say. We become, at our basic level, completely, I want to say, human in a non-human way. I can't explain it more than that. What happens again is that all of a sudden literature becomes, I'm not going to name names, where people think that, oh, life is about, these two couples sitting and eating breakfast in the morning, because that makes, who the fuck gives a shit about that?
I like the breakfast part.
Well, especially if it's Lebanese breakfast, because American breakfast is but again, for a lot of people, I know real people who actually think that their life is a movie, that, there's a beginning and an end, and they are the star of that movie, which they don't know that I am the star. But the truth is, like I said, it's just everything is just completely random, and we're just lucky in many ways to be able to be alive right now and to think that we have reason and understanding, but the truth is we don't.
I was rereading some of the reviews of Unnecessary Woman, which, by the way, was up for the National Book Award, the National Book Critics Circle Award. It won the California Book Award. Is that
something like that?
Californians are so easy.
God, they're so easy.
But one of the things I found quite fascinating is one of the beauties of this book is if you love books, this book makes no apologies for the fact that most of our lives and our internal lives are filled with books and other people's stories, that sometimes those things are more real to us than our own lives. And one of the reviews written by a sort of US-born Arabist, you know.
Oh, fuck it.
You know which one I'm talking about.
Yes.
He said what Alia does in this book is she's translating novels by W.G. Sebald, poems by Pessoa, Javier Marias, Roberto Bolaño from various languages, French and English into Arabic. She puts them in a closet and shuts the door. And this reviewer was baffled. He said, but she lived through the heyday of Arab translation when Adonis had a magazine that was translating all the modernists. And I felt like you very specifically, on purpose, have her do nothing with these things.
It's like there are reviewers and there are reviewers. And that part was not annoying because that part was, he's just stupid. That's no problem. There are lots of stupid people out there, I forgive them. What that part was, that review was horrid, even though allegedly it was a good review, was he had the gall, he's this white intellectual, to basically say that he knows Beirut better than the Lebanese. I mean, no. So he started coming up with, and she's walking, and this is the neighborhood he meant. Like, no, that's not the neighborhood I meant. And that was so fucking annoying. It was so annoying. But he completely missed it. He just completely missed. And that's fine, because there's lots of, I've read a lot of books that I just completely missed what the book was about. I mean, that's not a problem. The problem is when somebody then decides to tell me what my book is about. And that is a problem.
I want to talk a tiny bit about Invisible Cities, because it's a book that I feel like comes up in, this book comes up in Unnecessary Woman. Is certainly something that's had an influence in how Alexander Hemon, to some degree, has mapped himself on Chicago and remapped Sarajevo from the United States. Rabih very gently pointed out to me that his novel is not a chronicle of the Lebanese Civil War, that Beirut, in which his book takes place, is his Beirut, and just as Kamala Shamsi's books take place in her own Karachi, The City by the Sea, her first novel. It is not a map of Karachi, it's her Karachi. And talk to me about the first time you read that book, because and how it changed your ideas in ways that books are mapped.
Are we talking about Invisible Cities?
Yeah.
Which is Italo Calvino's book. I'm a big fan of Calvino. Actually, the funny thing about that book, I'm going to change the subject. Because what's really amazing about that book is the cities are lovely and all that. Cities. What is really wonderful about that book is a passage that goes, if I remember correctly now, that the entire world is infernal. And to live well, you find people who are not infernal, and you hold them close. And I think that is one of the most amazing things I've ever read. That, you just have to find your city if you want. You have to find your friends, your people, and hold them close, because the rest of the world is hell. That's a good change.
Yeah, that was. If we were in wrestling, that'd be 2 points, reversal. Let's keep talking about books, because one of the great things about Rabih is that he's a kind of precursor to the Nobel. So before Imre Kertész won the Nobel Prize for Fatelessness, he said, "Here, you should read this book." So many writers, I think, and then there are writers that are often forgotten, like Cortázar, and you are a huge fan of his linked stories, which kind of go in perpetual circles. Can you talk about that book, and or any book? I'm a reader. That's the most important thing. I mean, not as in, I'm a reader, makes me special. It's just where I lose myself, and that's what I like. And the reason I can, pick books is because I don't like books.
interesting is that I like these, little small books. Cortázar was a big, big influence, particularly House Lodge. It's an amazing book that came out in the 1967, I think. And what is amazing is, for me, when like Kool-Aids came out or Hakawati, a lot of people think that, oh, this is experimental. And I want to say this was done in the 40s, this was done in the 50s. We've just become in some ways more conservative intellectually. We no longer try these different things, we just keep going for what's tried and true. It's like we keep coming up with Rocky 1, Rocky 2, Rocky 3, Rocky 4, Rocky 16. And that's our literature, unfortunately. It's the same books over and over and over and over. And what I'm interested in, even like we were talking about Marine Dao, who I didn't really like the book, but I loved it. Because it was unlike anything else I've read. It was I was reading someone special. I might dislike a little bit, but not hate it. So in Spain, on the big part was like, this writer thinks Hemingway is a fraud. I don't think he's a fraud, but I don't hate him as much as she does, but yeah.
And it's true in this book that the books, and she has two people that she's close to. She has a lover and she has a friend, and then she has these neighbors that she hates, that she loves to hate in a certain way. But the books are more real to her than people.
But in many ways, I actually think books are more real than people, real people. We were having this discussion a little bit earlier as to whether I actually hate people or just dislike them a little. I have not decided yet. But that doesn't mean that I don't love people. It's just that I also hate them. It's this thing. And so, I feel, for me, I feel alive with a good book, and they're getting rarer and rarer. I feel more connected. It is the way that I look at the world. With Alia, she's a little bit more extreme than I am. In many ways, I think that she's somebody I look up to. I would love to be her. I would love to be able to write and not care what some fucking reviewer says about the book. I really would love that, but I'm not as enlightened as she is. I would love to be able to write and not publish. I'm unable to. I love the acclaim. As much as I hate you people, I like you people. So it's a conflicting thing for me. But as for her, it's more straightforward. She's comfortable in many ways. She knows herself, and I kind of like that.
And she's one of many, beautiful, fully realized, three-dimensional female characters you've created, and I think you'll probably get tired of being praised for that, because I think that it's as if you've created turned a species of subhuman into a real person.
And I find that I get told all the time. My favorite actually is when it was mostly for Hakawati that I got asked how your women characters are so strong. And I always found that amazing. But I never got asked that by Lebanese, either Lebanese people or by Lebanese journalists. It was always Western journalists. Like, oh, your women have agency. They do things. My favorite was, where do you find the inspiration for this? Like, have you fucking met my mother? Let me introduce you. Let me introduce you to my sisters. It's just, I don't understand it. I never understood that. And I never understood that I don't write women characters. I write a character. Alia is not, I didn't sit down and go, oh, how can I make this woman real? And it would never enter the question. It was, how do I make Halia real, the specific person? I just never thought that it would be some amazing thing that, oh, it's a woman, or it's a man, or it's a person, it's a human being. And that was the biggest problem. How do you make a human real on the page?
How did you do that?
How the fuck do I know?
Let me ask you a question that will connect to something that Sasha said earlier, which we were talking about arrival, and I noted that if you come to a place like the United States, the myths that are fed to you growing up are a little bit realer because they stand out more starkly. And last night, as we were telling wonderful Mulia jokes, or I was just listening to them, Rabih said something quite interesting. He said, myths are beautiful as long as we don't believe them. And I want to talk to you. It's one thing to put what you're arrested by, what you're angry by, what you're possessed by, what you know into a book. And yet, you do live most of the time in San Francisco. You do live most of the time in a country that has a kind of denial of death within it. You do live in a country which most residents cannot place places on the Middle East. And so how do you, Mona is an activist, and she does her work on Twitter and writing books and columns. There must be a kind of anger that results out of this gap between living in a culture which denies death, which denies who you are and where you're from, and your work. And what do you do with that anger other than bench press?
Get pedicures. Let's put it this way. The thing that's important is that I've never believed that there's a culture that is better than another. There are some that probably fit me more, but in Kool-Aids I said, in America I fit but I do not belong. In Lebanon I belong but I do not fit. This tension between fitting and belonging, I think, is where I reside. I call it dislocation. I write about dislocation. We all feel dislocation. The only difference is that we either deny it or don't deny it. And any threat to dislocation is when you get mass suicides or mass murders. But it's the myth, and whether one believes in myths. One believes whatever one wants to believe. That is a big thing. Again, I grew up in a country where religion is the religion that you were born to. You do not decide what religion you are. You're a Christian Catholic, you're a Shiite, I'm a Druze. There's nothing I can do about that. What I find interesting is that then belonging to that group decides what the belief is. So that it fascinates me that the only reason you are this person is a Shiite is because you were born this way. But then all of a sudden, everything that the Shiite believe in becomes this person's belief. And I find that fascinating. So that the other beliefs are wrong because you were born into that group. So that need for belonging begins to be dominant. That we belong to this sect, so we will believe exactly what that way. And it's not just religion. Americans believe all kinds of things. The French believe they're intellectuals. Americans believe they're individuals. I don't have to tell you what Bosnians believe. And this becomes a actual dominant way of being by a simple accident. Going back to, it's just a random accident. You were born this, and it determines your belief, it determines your way of life. So we believe what we want to believe, and that takes over, because of course it's easier. So that myths are what made us, which was sort of my attempt in writing Hakawati, was to basically show that the stories are us. We are the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves. And then, you know, of course, it was read as, oh, look at those cute little Arabs, aren't they cute? Look at them, they're so nice. What we say about ourselves to ourselves determines everything. And yet we never examine what these myths are. Again, seriously, all Americans believe they are individualistics. You know, John Wayne walks into the bar, every single American. And the truth is, there is no more conformist country than the United States. Okay? They never. The French seriously believe they're intellectuals. You go into a taxi driver, they start talking about Foucault. They've never fucking read Foucault, but they start talking about Foucault. They believe that. It becomes a determinant characteristic of people, and I find that fascinating. We all believe, you know, like whether, again, that gays are bad or, you know, women should be so. These are just beliefs that have nothing to do with anything, yet we will fight tooth and nail and kill people for those beliefs. We prove by a fucking accident. One sperm went into an egg somewhere and it was the wrong sperm.
Let me, at one point, Alia says, may I admit that being different from normal people is what I desperately sought. Which I think is a real beautiful inversion. You know, not I survived and I was different, but I wanted to be different. And I suspect that the same is true of you.
Yes, and at the same time, I desperately want to belong. I mean, this is important. It's a human thing to want to belong, to want to be heard, to want to be hugged and loved, and that's human. At the same time, it costs so fucking much. So, you know, that tension, I think, is where, for me, that's where art is.
Let me ask you one final question and open it to the audience. You've talked a lot about sort of the accidental nature of our lives, you know. It's mind-boggling to me that, you know, the two of us can share a stage, given the differences of our upbringing.
It's mind-boggling to me that somebody listens to me. I mean, this is just completely mind-boggling.
It's not mind-boggling to me, but I've read the books. But talk about one happy accident of your life.
I was born into a wonderful family. I mean, again, my father, my mother, my sisters. My greatest gift, in many ways, is that I was loved. You know, with all my craziness, and I curse them, and I live, you know, in San Francisco, and they're in Beirut, and you know, there is a reason. I love them dearly.
It made me cry. Ladies and gentlemen, Rabih Alameddine. Does anybody have a question for Rabia? And you can put the money in my pocket. I'll split it with them later.
Not from that section.
We have a question. We have a question.
Talk to the hand.
Rabia, this is not revenge for yesterday, but I have a two-part question for you. The first question is the more serious one. Do you support Arsenal only because they have hot players?
Yes.
Okay, here's a more serious question now. I mentioned yesterday what an inspirational and groundbreaking book Kool-Aid was for me, in that here I am as this young Arab woman who read for the first time an Arab man writing openly about being gay. More recently in the Middle East and North Africa, which is the region I obsess over the most, we have seen people like our kind of mutual friend, if I can call him that, Hamid Sinnoub, the lead singer of Mashrou' Layla, that popular Lebanese band, and other writers who've written openly gay novels, the Moroccan author, the Jordanian, Palestinian author, and others. So could you give us an idea of how, between Kool-Aids and now, the gay scene, for lack of a better term, has changed or evolved in the Middle East and North Africa, especially when it comes to the arts?
Well, it has evolved again. For me, the arts do help, although really, who reads anymore? But no, what has helped is visibility. The fact, if one of my proudest thing in many ways is that whether the book is, let me go back. Kool-Aid was republished recently, and I had to reread it for the first time in a long, long time, and I hated it. It was it's a horrible, horrible book, but you should read it. But it's horrible. But you definitely should read it to see how horrible it is. But one of the, sort of, in many ways, I felt a little, God, I don't know how to say proud very well, that it has been an influence on a lot of people. You know, like the band that she's talking about, they studied my book in college. So that is really wonderful. So it's not about quality, it's about, in many ways, just visibility, being seen. And that has changed. My big line is, you can't hate a homosexual if you know one. You know, I don't know who was telling the story about during a gay march over here, some people were throwing stones. Well, you wouldn't throw stones if it was your son, or if it was your daughter, or your wife, or it's difficult to it's easy to hate someone if you can't see them as a person, and it's difficult to see somebody as not a person if you know that person. So visibility is the big thing, and what has changed in the Middle East is visibility. That, you know, there are gay clubs, that there are people who refuse to be silent. There's always this argument that, you know, why now? Can't you do whatever you want without putting it on our face? And my response to that is always, fuck your face. Just fuck your face. Because as long as there is one child who is going to kill himself or herself for being gay or lesbian or whatever, my silence, my invisibility becomes a crime. So for me, what has changed is that a lot of people now agree with me. You know, and it wasn't me per se, but it's the visibility, that people are more visible. That's as simple as that. So you get now, you know, Hamid, who is able to sing about being gay to 80,000 people. Try shutting that up. Well, nobody can shut Hamid up. He doesn't stop talking. But yeah, that's basically what has changed. Now again, it's nothing ever changes. You know, there'll always be backlash, but it is going to be very difficult to hide it. You can't go back to why, you know, not being in your face.
Since I have a microphone already, I wanted to actually, maybe not a question, but just, you talked about criticism, and you talked about writing for yourself, not giving a shit what everybody else thinks. And it's very common, I'm a musician, and it's very common for the also composers, 20th century or 21st century composers would say the same. They write music and they don't give a shit who will feel it or understand it. So they will write it because they just want to write it. But my question is, like, John Zorn, one of the very known musicians, said, like, artists shouldn't be criticized, they should be understood and supported. And I completely agree. I hope I understood what you were saying about the criticism, like literature criticism, and that you are the biggest criticist of your own work. I think most people here, they read your books because I want to thank you, and buy book because we we had the opportunity to actually read all of your books in Sarajevo, in Bosnian language. And I think most of the people would agree with me, at least for me, they were a life-changing experience. And kind of important for me as an artist. And I just want to ask you, since you don't really, how to say, like you said, you write for yourself, you don't give a shit what everybody else thinks.
But I also lie.
Well, I was hoping you would say that, because your books, Hakavati, Kuleit, they're also like, they really changed me. So I always hope that artists have kind of goal to not just write to do their art for themselves, but actually we have I like to think, we don't have to agree here, but that art is actually here and we are just, maybe we have a task to, how to say this, to change the future, if not present. So your books actually could do that. So I was just wondering if you have that goal or not.
No, I don't. I mean, because I know exactly what you're saying, and I support what you're saying. The main difference is that I'm a little bit older, and I don't believe that there is such a thing as art. You know, art is an escapist of we go, oh, you know, this is art. Usually, for me, and please forgive me, I'm not attacking. We talk about art when we have no idea what we're talking about. I'm not an artist, I don't create art. I try to make a novel work. That's what I do. So usually when I'm working, I'm not thinking about an audience. I'm not thinking about changing the world. I'm trying to make this fucking thing behave, and it never behaves. That's all I'm interested in. When we start talking about art, and when we start talking about, ooh, changing the world, which I would love to do, whether we do or not, is a side effect of trying to write a fucking good book, to just trying to make it work. That to me is what I suffer most in life. The whole idea of changing the world is such an arrogant, you know, it makes us special, like all the people out there don't know anything, whereas I am an artist who is going to change the world and make art and please. Make shoes. That makes much easier. You know, you're doing a service to humanity. Make good shoes. Much better. I write because, as much as I hate it most of the time, I like it sometimes. I like making a book work. It's a puzzle in my head. It's a way of making something work. Anything more than that, for me, is extra. Like I said, I am really proud that my book is, but that was 20 years ago, and I think now it is a horrible book, because, you know, the one that I'm working on now, not this one, and not the one that's coming out in October, the one that is in my head, I'm trying to make it work. That's almost the only thing that I can think about. So I'm sitting here wondering, how can I, because I'm writing about a refugee, and I'm thinking, but what happens? I mean, right now, as I'm talking to you about what happens if she doesn't go to Greece, she goes to Turkey. Ooh, that's what concerns me. Not about, oh, will my work matter? That happens in therapy. But they didn't give me an award. How could they not appreciate my art? I understand it. I've gone through it. Right now, in this moment, I'm worried about the book that I want to write. That's the only thing that interests me. So to talk about art, which I guess we talked about it a little, I always feel a little kind of, again, you were saying we do, my first reaction is like, no, that's not what I do. And I might change my mind in the next 2 minutes, as I said, but right now, for me, it's really all about how I write a book. I try to make it the best book that I can. that's about as far as I can go.
Well, I think I should say that he's a liar. His book's really good. There's a stack of them out there. I highly encourage you to read them. It will
Actually,
change your
not
life.
this, but I was told that some of them were sold out.
Some of them are sold out. As I was reading this today, a hailstorm started and the temperature dropped about 40 degrees.
I have this effect, you know, so as an artist, I can't. Yes.
So,
Well, can I respond?
Oh, please.
Oh, thank you. I think you're an artist. For me, your books are artistic in a smaller sense.
Oh, I really thank you, and I appreciate it, and I disagree. But
No, it doesn't matter what I mean, you already said it doesn't matter what I mean. It doesn't give a shit. But I wanted to say, like, do you have a goal when you write, except fulfilling your ambition to do your best thing that you can do? Do you have a goal with your books?
Probably. I'm just not sure. You know, again, I try to make it work, and I don't mean work in terms of plot. I mean, I've had this discussion lately because, again, once I've reached, I think this is my sixth book, and now I can see a pattern. Even though, you know, they're different and I try to change things, but I can see a pattern. So whether I'm conscious of it or not, there is a goal. In many ways, I don't want to believe that there is, because I have a big head. If I start going into, oh, what an artist I am insufferable. And some of my friends have seen it. And again, this is why I have a psychiatrist who tells me, you're not that good of an artist.
Shame on him.
No, actually, I love it. But no, it's a big deal. It's a separation of making it more realistic.
Thank you. Hammond's Brick in the Lazarus Project says that home is somewhere where home is a place where somebody notices when you are no longer there, if I quote that well. On that note, I have a question for both Mona and you. What or where is home for you? Thank you.
Sure, but I've also written about that in my book.
I haven't read it yet.
No, it's okay. No, because it's not. Well, I've said it a number of times in different ways. Home is never where I am. Home is where I am not. And when I'm in San Francisco, home is Beirut. When I'm in Beirut, home is San Francisco. And that's an important thing because for me, I think in this one, and I say a writer is one who knows he is not home or she's not home. When one feels at home, one is not an artist. When one is at home, it's comatose. You know, it is. I actually feel in many ways that if I ever find real home, I would die. But at the same time, I could also say home is San Francisco and home is Lebanon, but it's not the case. So in many ways, there is this whole sort of thought of home is where my heart is, or home is wherever I am. That's bullshit. But I do feel at home at times, and most of the time I don't feel at home, and it makes me feel alive. I'm constantly aware. Otherwise, I think one is dead. You know, we might be walking, but we're probably dead.
No, this is Rabih. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
One piece of good news that I'd like to share before I invite you to go out, get a book signed by Rabih Alameddine. All of of us have extended families. Rabih Haj's wife, Alameddine, who's a beautiful novelist herself, was just longlisted for the Booker Prize for her most recent novel, the title of which is
Do Not Say We Have Nothing.
Do Not Say We're Nothing. I hope if this festival happens again, she is able to come here because she would fit very well into the discussions that we're having. And on that note, I invite you to go out into the night and read this terrible book by this wonderful person, Rabih Alameddine.